She screamed at him to get out of her house. Not quietly, not politely. She pointed her finger directly at the most dangerous man in New York City and told him he had no right to be there. Serafina Bellucci had been raised to be untouchable. Her father ran half the docks on the eastern seaboard. Her family's name made men lower their eyes. And she had spent 26 years being told that one day she would marry Damiano Moretti and together they would own everything worth owning. So when she found out he had canceled the wedding, not called to explain, not sent a representative but simply canceled it 3 days before, she did not cry. She started making calls. If you've ever loved someone who didn't choose you back, if you've ever worked yourself to the bone while nobody noticed, this story is going to hit somewhere you weren't expecting. Stay with us until the end, because the moment Damiano Moretti walked into that kitchen and saw what he saw, nothing was ever the same again. Subscribe to our channel if you haven't already, and hit that like button. Then drop your city and country in the comments below. I want to see exactly how far this story has traveled. Now, let's begin. The night it all started, Damiano Moretti was sitting across a mahogany table in a villa outside Florence, signing documents that would change the architecture of American organized crime for the next 50 years. The room smelled like old money, leather and aged wood, and the kind of quiet that only exists when everyone in it is afraid of everyone else. Across from him sat Enzo Bellucci, a man with white hair and the slow, deliberate movements of someone who had long stopped needing to rush. Enzo's lawyers flanked him on both sides. Damiano's consigliere, Marco Vitale, sat to his right, pen already uncapped. It was 2:47 in the morning. The wedding was in 4 days. Damiano signed the first document without reading it. He had already read it 17 times. It transferred a controlling interest in 3 shipping companies to a joint holding entity that would be managed by both families after the marriage. Standard, clean, the kind of deal that looked like a merger on paper and functioned like a treaty in practice. He reached for the second document and felt his phone vibrate. He ignored it. It vibrated again. Then a third time in quick succession, 3 pulses, which was the code his head of security, a man named Wren, used exclusively for alerts from the penthouse surveillance system. Damiano set his pen down. "Excuse me a moment," he said. Enzo looked up. The lawyers looked up. Marco looked at him with a question in his eyes. "1 moment," Damiano repeated, and walked out of the room. In the hallway, he pulled up the alert on his phone. The system had flagged motion in the main kitchen. Not a window breach, not a door override, but movement detected by the interior sensor array. Someone was inside the apartment, not outside it, inside, which meant they had either a key or a code. He stared at the notification for 4 seconds. Then he walked back into the signing room, shook Enzo Bellucci's hand, told Marco to hold everything until morning, and left for the airstrip. Nobody argued with him. That was one of the strange facts of Damiano Moretti's life. Very few people argued with him about anything, and the ones who occasionally did were the same people who made sure to do it privately, carefully, and only after they had already done what he asked. He had not built this dynamic through cruelty alone. He had built it through a reputation for being right often enough that people had simply stopped betting against him. He was 41 years old. He had taken over the Moretti organization at 27 after his father's heart attack, and had spent the following 14 years expanding it from a regional crime family into something that didn't have a clean name anymore. A shadow infrastructure that touched legitimate finance, politics, real estate, and international shipping. He didn't run drugs. He had made that decision at the beginning and had never wavered from it, partly for practical reasons, and partly because he had grown up watching what that particular business did to the people inside it, and he had decided early that it wasn't a trade he was willing to make. He had other trades, of course. He was not naive about what he was, but he had rules, and his rules had made him predictable in the ways that mattered to the people around him, and that predictability had earned him something more durable than fear: reliability. People knew where they stood with Damiano Moretti. They knew what he would do and what he wouldn't. In the criminal world, that kind of consistency was worth more than any amount of violence. On the jet, he didn't sleep. He sat in the leather seat with a glass of water he didn't drink and watched the Atlantic pass beneath him in the dark. He told himself he was returning because a security breach required his personal attention. He told himself this was practical. He told himself that whoever had gotten into his apartment was likely dead before the night was over. He almost believed all of it. He came in through the service entrance on the building's east side, the one that connected to the freight elevator, the one that only 3 people in the world knew he used. He moved quietly, not the theatrical quiet of someone performing stealth, but the natural habitual quiet of a man who had spent his entire life in rooms where sound could be dangerous. The apartment was dark except for the kitchen. He heard the sound before he saw her. A soft, irregular sound, the kind a person makes when they're trying very hard not to make any sound at all. He stopped in the hallway outside the kitchen doorway and stood completely still for a long moment. Then he looked around the corner. Lucia Navarro was sitting on the floor, not in a chair, not at the counter. On the marble floor with her back against the base of the island, her knees drawn up, a ceramic bowl in her lap. She was eating cold risotto with a spoon. She was moving very slowly, the way people move when they're exhausted down to the cellular level. She was wearing a large gray sweatshirt that was too big for her and sweatpants that had a small bleach stain on the left knee, and her dark hair was in a bun that had mostly come undone. And she was crying, not dramatically. There was no heaving, no visible breakdown. Her face was just wet, and her eyes were red, and her jaw was doing that tight thing jaws do when someone has been holding themselves together for too long and has finally stopped trying. Her phone was on the floor beside her, face up, on a call. "I know, Mama," she was saying, in Spanish, very quietly. "I know. It's okay. Don't cry. Please don't cry." Damiano stayed in the doorway. He understood Spanish well enough. He had not always. He had made a point of learning it in his late 20s, for business reasons, because half the port workers in New York spoke it, and he had decided that relying on translators was a form of vulnerability he couldn't afford. He was not fluent, but he understood enough. "The doctor said what?" Lucia said. Then she closed her eyes. "Okay. Okay. How much?" A pause. "Mama, I'll figure it out. I always figure it out." Another pause, longer. "No, I don't want you to sell the house. That's not... Mama, that house is all we have. I'll find the money. I'm working 3 jobs right now. Senor Moretti pays well and the diner on 48th gives me the weekend breakfast shifts, and I started babysitting again for the family on Lexington. I'm fine. I'm okay. I just..." She stopped. She pressed the back of her hand to her mouth for a moment. "I just miss home," she said. Her voice cracked on the last word very slightly, and she pressed her mouth closed again and breathed through her nose. "I'm fine. I'm fine. Tell me about her. Tell me what the doctor said exactly." Damiano took one step back from the doorway and stood in the dark of the hallway. He had lived in this apartment for 11 years. He had employed housekeeping staff through a management service since the beginning, and Lucia Navarro had been assigned to him 14 months ago when the previous housekeeper, an older Hungarian woman named Vera, had retired. He had met Lucia 3 times. Once when the management service introduced her, once when he happened to be home when she was cleaning and had asked her to stay out of his office, and once when he returned from a trip and found a note on his kitchen counter explaining that the dishwasher had made a strange noise and she had called the building maintenance line. He had signed her checks every month without looking at them. He had eaten meals she prepared without knowing they were hers. He had lived 11 months out of the last 14 essentially sharing a space with another human being and had managed to know almost nothing about her. He stood in the hallway and listened to her talk to her mother for another 6 minutes. He listened to her explain, in a voice that kept trying to sound steady, that the surgery her mother needed, a spinal tumor, the doctor was saying immediate intervention, would cost more than she could put together in less than 3 months at her current rate. He listened to her promise several times that she would not let her mother sell the house. He listened to her say, "I'm safe here, Mama. I have a good place to sleep. I'm fine." And then he understood something that the security alert had not told him. The service closet, 3 doors down the hall, had a small folding cot in it that had not been there 11 months ago. He had walked past it twice in the last month and had not registered it consciously, but the information had been in his head somewhere, unprocessed. The way information sits when you're not looking at the right thing to make it mean something. She wasn't sleeping in the service closet every night. She was sleeping in the service closet every night because she had nowhere else to go. He waited until she ended the call. He waited through the long silence that followed it, the silence of a person sitting alone with something too heavy to put down. Then he walked into the kitchen, turned on the overhead light, the gentle one, not the harsh one above the stove, and pulled out the chair at the kitchen island. Lucia moved so fast she knocked the bowl off her lap. The risotto hit the marble and the bowl spun twice and came to a stop without breaking, and she was already on her feet, her back against the refrigerator, her eyes wide and terrified, and then, as she registered who he was, shifting through several expressions in rapid succession, terror, recognition, humiliation, and then something that settled into a kind of braced defiance. The look of someone who knows they are caught and has decided not to beg. "Mr. Moretti?" she said. Her voice was remarkably controlled for someone who had just been caught crying on her employer's kitchen floor at 4 a.m. I can explain. Sit down," he said. "I'm sorry. I know I shouldn't be here. I know this is not... I needed a minute. I was going to clean up and... Lucia." He said her name for the first time. It felt strange in his mouth, not because it was difficult, but because he had never needed to say it before, and now it felt important to say it correctly. "Sit down, please." She sat. Not in the chair. She sat back down on the floor, pulling her knees up the way she'd been sitting before, which was probably habit, which meant she sat on this floor regularly enough to have a default position on it. He looked at her. She looked back at him with the careful, measuring look of a woman trying to calculate exactly how much trouble she was in. He pulled the chair out from the island, turned it around, and sat on it backwards, his arms resting across the top. It was not how he normally sat in chairs. He wasn't entirely sure why he did it. Something about her expression, the braced quality of it, the way she was clearly expecting the worst, made him want to take up less space. "How long?" he said. She said nothing. "How long have you been sleeping in the closet?" It wasn't a question. She heard that it wasn't a question. She looked down at the floor for a moment, and he watched her make the decision to stop performing. 7 weeks, she said. "What happened to your apartment?" She told him. Not in the careful way people tell stories when they want to manage the impression they're making. She told him the way people talk when they're too tired to perform, flatly, matter-of-factly, the events laid out in sequence. Her landlord had sold the building. The new owner had raised the rent by $800 and given the tenants 60 days' notice. She had looked for other apartments and found nothing she could afford in the neighborhoods with subway access to the jobs she was working. She had put some things in a storage unit. She had moved the rest into the service closet. "I wasn't going to stay forever," she said. "I was saving. I have a plan. 3 more months and I would have enough for first and last and deposit somewhere." "Your mother," he said. She went still. "I wasn't listening on purpose," he said. "I was standing in the hallway. I heard enough." She looked at the floor. A small muscle in her jaw moved. "How much does the surgery cost?" he said. "Mr. Moretti." "How much?" She told him the number. It was not a small number. It was the kind of number that would require someone working 3 jobs to save for the better part of 2 years, assuming nothing else went wrong, assuming no emergencies, assuming the arithmetic of a life with no margin held perfectly together. He nodded slowly. "I'm going to pay for it," he said. She looked up at him. "No," she said. "Yes." "No." Her voice was steady, and her eyes were dry now, which he recognized as the calm that comes after you've already exhausted your tears. "I know what it means when a man like you does something like that. I know what that kind of help costs, and I'm not interested in those terms." He looked at her for a long moment. In his entire adult life, he could count on one hand the number of people who had said no to him and meant it. The ones who meant it always had a quality he had never been able to name precisely, something in the stillness of them, the way they didn't shift or look away while they were saying it. Like the word was coming from somewhere structural, from the foundation of who they were, and they had already considered every consequence and decided the word was worth it. Lucia had that quality. "That's not what this is," he said. "How would I know that?" "Because I'm telling you." She shook her head slowly. Men with power always believe that their intentions change what their help means. But it doesn't work like that. What you give comes with what you are, whether you mean it to or not. He stared at her. She stared back, and she looked for a moment genuinely startled by her own words, like they had come out with more force than she had intended, and she wasn't sure what to do about that. "Your mother is going to die if she doesn't have this surgery," he said. Not cruelly, simply. She closed her eyes. "Yes," she said. "I know. And 3 months is too long. I know that too." "Then tell me," he said quietly, "what's the actual decision here?" She opened her eyes. She looked at him for a long time, long enough that he could see her working through something, turning it over, examining it from different angles the way someone does when they're trying to find the flaw in an argument they can't immediately counter. "If I take this," she finally said, "and it turns out you're not the man you're presenting yourself as right now, then I've traded my mother's life for something I can't take back." He nodded. "That's a fair assessment of the risk. So tell me why I shouldn't be afraid of that." He was quiet for a moment. Around them, the kitchen held the specific silence of very early morning, the silence of a city that had briefly stopped performing. "I can't tell you that," he said. "I can tell you what this is and what it isn't, but I can't make you believe it. That's not something I can do for you." He paused. "What I can do is make the call tonight, have the funds wired to the hospital in the morning, and let you decide afterward what that means about who I am." She looked at him. "No strings," he said. "No terms. No debt. Kindness shouldn't be a transaction. If I've let a woman work in my home for over a year and never once noticed she had nowhere to sleep, the least I can do is this." Something in her face shifted. Not dramatically. Not the way it shifts in movies where the music comes in and the light changes. It shifted the way a door shifts when someone finally stops pushing against it. A very small movement, barely perceptible, but enough to change whether something is open or closed. "My mother's name is Elena," she said. Her voice was very quiet. "She is 63 years old. She has been afraid to tell me how bad the pain has gotten because she didn't want me to worry." He reached for his phone. "What hospital?" he said. She told him. He made the call. Not to a secretary, not to an intermediary. He made it himself, directly, and he spoke in the specific tone of someone who does not expect to repeat himself and has enough knowledge of how institutions work to know exactly which words to use to get a thing done before morning. The conversation lasted 4 minutes. He hung up. "Someone will contact the hospital's financial office when they open," he said. "The funds will clear before noon." Lucia sat on the marble floor of his kitchen and said nothing for a very long moment. Then she said, "Why?" He thought about it. He was not a man who spoke without thinking, and he was not a man who provided people with more honesty than the situation required. But something about the kitchen floor, and the cold risotto, and the 4 in the morning quality of the moment made the careful calculations feel ridiculous. "Because I walked past that closet twice last month," he said, "and it didn't register, and it should have. And I have been sitting in Italy signing my name to a future I never wanted, and the most real thing I've seen in months is a woman crying alone on a kitchen floor because she misses her mother and she's too proud to ask for help." He paused. That seemed like something worth doing something about. She looked at him. He looked at her. Outside, Manhattan was beginning the slow, reluctant shift from night to morning, the city's light changing by degrees too gradual to name. "I'll clean up the risotto," she said finally. "Leave it," he said. "Are you hungry? There's more in the refrigerator." She blinked. "You're offering me food. You're sitting on my kitchen floor at 4 in the morning. The least I can do is offer you a chair." Something happened to her face then that he hadn't seen from her before. Something that wasn't quite a smile, but was close enough to one that he found himself paying close attention to it. "I'm okay," she said. "Okay," he said. Neither of them moved for a moment. "Mr. Moretti," she said. "Damiano," he said. It came out more naturally than he expected. She looked at him. "Thank you," she said. It sounded like it cost her something to say it, like she had examined it carefully before offering it, the way you examine something fragile before handing it to someone whose grip you're not entirely sure of. He nodded. He stood, replaced the chair, and walked to the door of the kitchen. Then he stopped. "The guest suite on the east side has been empty for 2 years," he said, without turning around. "The sheets are clean. There's no reason for you to sleep in a closet." He didn't wait for her to respond. He walked down the hall, into the dark of his apartment, and closed his bedroom door behind him. He stood in the dark for a while. He had come home expecting a threat. He had found something that was, in its own way, more unsettling than any threat he had faced in 14 years of running the most powerful criminal organization on the East Coast. He had found someone he had been completely invisible to. And it turned out that being invisible to her, not being feared, not being managed, not being navigated around the way every other person in his life navigated around him, felt like something he didn't have the right word for yet. He filed it away carefully, the way you file away something you're not ready to examine yet. The way you set a thing down in a safe place because you suspect that when you finally look at it properly, it's going to require your full attention. 3 days later, he would cancel a wedding that was supposed to solidify a billion-dollar empire. But that night, he simply stood in the dark and acknowledged, very quietly, that something had shifted in a way he hadn't planned for and could not entirely explain. Outside his window, Manhattan went on being Manhattan, indifferent and enormous and relentlessly bright, the way it always was, the way it always would be. A city that made people invisible every single day and never once noticed what it was losing. The morning after Damiano made the call, Lucia did not move into the guest suite. He found out at 7 a.m. when he walked past the service closet on his way to the kitchen and noticed the door was pulled almost shut but not latched. The way someone closes a door when they're trying not to make noise, not the way someone closes a door when they're leaving for good. He stopped. He put his hand flat against the wood for a moment. Then he continued to the kitchen without saying anything. She was already there. She had made coffee. Real coffee, not the machine kind. The kind that required a specific ceramic pour-over setup that lived on the third shelf and that he used maybe twice a year. The smell hit him before he rounded the corner. She was standing at the counter with her back to him, pouring hot water in a slow, deliberate circle, and she had changed into clean clothes, dark jeans, a plain white shirt, but her hair was still damp and she was barefoot on the marble, and she looked, he thought, like someone who had slept badly but had decided not to let it show. "You didn't move to the suite," he said. She didn't turn around. "No." "Why?" She finished the pour before she answered. She set the kettle down, turned, and handed him the coffee cup with both hands, the way people do when they've been raised in a place where offering something with one hand is considered careless. "Because accepting the surgery was already a lot," she said. "I didn't want to take everything in one night." He looked at her. "That's not the same thing." "To you, maybe." He took the coffee. She turned back to the counter and started making a second cup. He sat on the bar stool at the island, not the one at the far end, the one closer to where she was standing, and drank the coffee and didn't say anything else about the closet. The coffee was very good. He noted this without comment. They existed in the kitchen together for 20 minutes in a silence that was not comfortable exactly, but was not hostile either. It was the silence of two people who are each trying to figure out what the new rules are, and neither of whom is willing to ask directly. At 7:40, his phone rang. It was Marco. "You need to come back to Florence," Marco said, before Damiano had said anything. "Enzo is asking questions. Tell him the deal stands." "He's not asking about the deal. He's asking about why you left." "Tell him I had a security matter." "Damiano." Marco's voice dropped slightly. Into the register he used when he was about to say something he had already decided to say and knew wasn't going to land well. "The wedding is in 4 days. Enzo Bellucci does not operate on faith. If you're not on a plane in the next 6 hours, I'll handle it." He ended the call. He set the phone face down on the counter. Lucia had gone very still during the call. Not obviously. She was still moving, still reaching for the second cup. But the quality of her stillness had changed, the way a room changes when someone in it starts listening very carefully. "I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't mean to. I wasn't trying to complicate your—" "You didn't complicate anything," he said. "Your wedding is in 4 days." "I'm aware." She turned and looked at him directly. It was a habit he had already noticed. She looked at people directly when she was about to say something she needed them to actually hear, like she was making sure her words had somewhere to land. Mr. Moretti. I told you, Damiano. She paused. Damiano. She said it like she was trying it out, like a word in a language she'd just started learning. You should go back. Whatever happened last night, it doesn't have to change anything for you. What if I don't want to go back? She stared at him. That's not a question you're allowed to ask me. He looked at her. You have obligations, she said, to people much more dangerous than me. I know what I have. Then go. She said it firmly, not unkindly. Go do what you have to do. I'll be fine. He picked up his phone. He looked at Marco's name on the screen. He set the phone back down. The hospital will call you this morning, he said. The contact name is Dr. Alvarado. Tell him everything your mother needs. Tell him there's no budget conversation necessary. Her jaw tightened. Okay. And move into the suite. She said nothing. It's not charity, he said. It's a reasonable thing. You work in this apartment. You should have a room. She looked at the floor for a moment. Then she nodded, just once, barely perceptible. He picked up his phone and called Marco back. I'll be in Florence by tonight, he said. He was not in Florence by tonight. What he was, by 6 p.m., was sitting in his own study, on a call with his lawyer that had been going for 40 minutes, reviewing the terms of the prenuptial agreement that Enzo Bellucci's team had sent over for final signatures. The document was 87 pages. He had read it once in Florence. He was reading it again now, and on page 53 he found a clause he had not noticed before, or had noticed and not processed, which amounted to the same failure. The clause was titled, in the dense legal language his lawyers favored, paragraph 31, C, non-dissolution event triggers. It stated in effect that in the event of the dissolution of the marriage for any reason within the first 12 years, excluding the death of either party, the transferred shipping assets would revert not to their original holders, but to a joint trust controlled by the Bellucci family, meaning that Enzo Bellucci would, in the event of a divorce, end up with Moretti assets without any reciprocal loss. He read the paragraph 3 times. When did this get added? He said. His lawyer, a man named Castellano, who had worked for the Moretti family for 22 years and who had a gift for delivering bad news in the tone of someone discussing the weather, said, it was in the draft sent on the 14th. It may have been easy to overlook in context. I pay you specifically so that things like this are not easy to overlook. A pause. Yes? How long have you known? Another pause. Since the 14th. And you didn't flag it. The Bellucci family's representation suggested it was standard boilerplate. Damiano set the document down on his desk very carefully. He had learned a long time ago that the moments when he most wanted to raise his voice were precisely the moments when keeping his voice completely level was most effective. Not because he was performing control, but because he had found that genuine quietness in moments of anger communicated something that shouting never did. It communicated that he had already processed the situation completely and had moved directly to deciding what to do about it. Castellano, he said, if I had signed those documents in Florence last night, with this clause in place, what would have happened to the Salerno port contracts in the event of a separation? A very long pause. They would have transferred, Castellano said. To Bellucci. Yes. Without recourse. Under the terms as written, yes. Damiano picked up the document again. He turned to page 53. He read the paragraph a 4th time. Get me Marco, he said, and get yourself a very good reason for why I shouldn't consider this a material failure on your part. You have until tomorrow morning. He ended the call. He sat in his study for a while without moving. The apartment was quiet. From somewhere, from the direction of the guest suite, he realized, which meant she had finally moved in. He could hear the faint sound of a television, very low, too low to make out words, just the murmur of it. The way people leave televisions on not because they want to watch them, but because they don't want to sit in total silence. He thought about the clause on page 53. He thought about what it meant in the context of everything he knew about Enzo Bellucci's way of doing business, the patience of it, the long game of it, The way Enzo had spent 40 years building things that looked like partnerships and functioned like acquisitions. He thought about a woman sitting on a kitchen floor at 3 in the morning, eating cold risotto, crying alone, and telling her sick mother she had a good place to sleep. He was not sure, at that moment, which of these two things was more clarifying. He got up and went to find Marco. Marco Vitale arrived at the apartment at 9 p.m. with the look of a man who had been traveling for 30 hours and had not slept through any of them. He was 54, heavy-set, with gray at his temples, and the permanently watchful eyes of someone who had spent 3 decades managing the gap between what people said and what they meant. He had been with Damiano's father before Damiano, and he had stayed when the transfer happened, which Damiano had always understood was not loyalty, so much as a calculated decision that the son was likely to outlast the alternatives. He dropped his coat on the chair by the door and said, "Tell me about the clause." "You saw it?" "I saw it on the plane. Castellano forwarded me the call summary." He sat down heavily. "It's not boilerplate. I've read enough Bellucci contracts to know what their boilerplate looks like. This was drafted specifically." Then Enzo knew about it. Enzo approved it. Marco looked at him, which means he spent 6 months negotiating this alliance, knowing that it had a built-in exit mechanism that advantaged him, which means either he planned for the marriage to fail, or he planned to make it fail, Damiano said. Marco nodded slowly. "He's 68 years old," Damiano said. "He has 1 daughter. He's been running his operation without a successor structure for 4 years since his son left. A merger gives him cover. A merger with a dissolution clause gives him assets. He would still need grounds. He has a daughter who is 26 and has been promised to me for 3 years. He has a daughter who is not exactly—" Damiano paused, choosing his words carefully. "She is not a woman who was built for patience." Marco stared at him. "You think he was going to manufacture grounds?" "I think Enzo Bellucci has never done anything in his life that wasn't structured to benefit Enzo Bellucci. And I think I was so focused on what I wanted out of this deal that I stopped asking what he wanted out of it." The room was quiet for a moment. "What do you want to do?" Marco said. Damiano looked at the window. Manhattan at 9 p.m. was what it always was. Loud and lit and fundamentally indifferent. A city that consumed plans and spit out consequences. He had loved it once, the scale of it, the relentlessness. Lately, it had started to feel like a machine he was trapped inside of. "I want to think," he said. "Damiano." Marco leaned forward. "The wedding is in 3 days. If you pull out now, I know what happens if I pull out." "Do you?" "Because Enzo won't take it quietly. He'll take it as an insult to Serafina, which gives him justification for a response, which means, I know what it means, Marco. Then you understand that pulling out of this deal without something to replace it with is not just a business problem, it's a— I said, I know." Marco stopped. They looked at each other. They had had hundreds of conversations that looked exactly like this one. The two of them on opposite sides of a decision, Marco laying out the logistics of the risk, and Damiano being the one who had to decide whether the risk was worth what was on the other side of it. They had a working language for these moments, built over 14 years of exactly this kind of pressure. "There's something else," Marco said. "Say it." "You came back from Florence because of a security alert." He said it carefully, not accusatorially, just laying it out. "Yes. And the alert was a housekeeper who had lost her apartment and was sleeping in the service closet," Damiano said, before Marco could finish the sentence. Marco looked at him for a long time. "That's all?" he said. "That's all." Another long pause. "And you're in your study reading prenup clauses at 9 at night instead of being on a plane back to Italy." "Correct." Marco rubbed his face with both hands. It was a gesture Damiano had seen him make maybe a dozen times in 14 years. Only in moments when he was trying to figure out how to say something that he knew the other person was not going to want to hear. "She's still here," Marco said. "Not a question. She works here." "Damiano, don't. I'm not saying anything." "You're about to." "I'm not." Marco stood up, picked up his coat. "I'm going to the hotel. I'm going to sleep for 6 hours. And tomorrow morning, the two of us are going to sit down with the full contract and figure out what kind of exit is least likely to get people shot. He moved toward the door. Then he stopped, without turning around. She good people? Damiano looked at the window. Yes, he said. Marco nodded once. He left. At 11 that night, there was a light knock on the study door. Come in, Damiano said. Lucia opened the door and stood in the frame. She was holding a plate, grilled chicken, roasted potatoes, something green that he recognized as the broccolini she had apparently found in his refrigerator, which he had bought 3 days ago and forgotten about. You didn't eat, she said. How do you know that? Because there's nothing in the trash and the kitchen is exactly how I left it, and it's 11 o'clock. He looked at the plate. He looked at her. You cooked, he said. I was cooking for myself anyway. She said it in the matter-of-fact tone she used when she was offering something and didn't want it to be turned into a thing. It's not a gesture. Don't read into it. He almost smiled. He wasn't entirely sure what to do with the almost smile, so he let it pass and said, Set it on the desk. She came in, set the plate down, and turned to go. The hospital called, she said, when she was almost to the door. She didn't turn around. Dr. Alvarado? He was very kind. He said the surgery is scheduled for Thursday. Good. My mother cried. A pause. I cried. He didn't say anything. There was nothing useful to say, and he had learned a long time ago that the impulse to fill silence with words was mostly about the person doing the filling. She wants to know who to thank, Lucia said. I didn't know what to tell her. Tell her it was taken care of, he said. She turned then, just enough to look at him over her shoulder. She's not the kind of woman who accepts that answer. Then tell her someone who owed a debt paid it. She looked at him for a moment. You didn't owe anything. Maybe not to her. He paused. But I owed something to the situation. She seemed to consider this. Then she nodded, just barely, and left. He ate the food. He didn't have a reason to be surprised, given that she had been cooking for him for 14 months, but he still registered it. Very good. Simple, correct, the kind of cooking that didn't try to impress. That was just trying to be nourishing, which was a different thing entirely. He sat in his study until 2 a.m. He did not sleep. He read the contract again. He read it specifically looking for what Enzo wanted out of it, approaching it not as a negotiating partner but as an adversary. And by the time he set it down, he had found 4 additional provisions that, taken together, told a very clear story about how Enzo Bellucci expected this marriage to end. He picked up his phone. He typed a message to Marco. I'm not going back to Florence. He set the phone down. He waited for Marco to respond. The response came 4 minutes later. It was 3 words. Jesus Christ, Damiano. He put the phone face down and looked at the ceiling. From down the hall, the television in the guest suite had gone quiet. The apartment was completely silent now, the silence of very late at night in a building full of people who were all asleep. The silence of a city that was not actually silent, but was at least pretending. He thought about the clause on page 53. He thought about Enzo Bellucci, 68 years old, patient and deliberate, sitting in that Florence villa with his white hair and his slow movements, signing documents across a mahogany table from a man he intended to dismantle at leisure. He thought about Serafina. He had met her 11 times. She was beautiful in the way expensive things are beautiful, precisely, deliberately, in a way that required maintenance. She was also intelligent, and she was also ambitious, and she had spent her entire life being told that she would marry Damiano Moretti, and this had given her, he suspected, a relationship to that fact that had nothing to do with him as a person and everything to do with what he represented. He did not dislike her. He had simply never had the experience, in 11 meetings, of feeling like he was talking to a person rather than a position. He thought about a woman who sat on kitchen floors and told her sick mother everything was fine, who accepted help with the careful deliberation of someone who had learned that careless acceptance was a form of danger, who made coffee with both hands and set plates down without waiting to be thanked. At 3 a.m, he picked up his phone again and called Castellano. I need you to draft a withdrawal notice, he said. Formal, citing the non-dissolution clause as a material misrepresentation. Castellano was shunted for a moment. That will not go over well. No, Damiano said, it won't. Enzo Bellucci will. I know what Enzo will do. Draft the notice. Have it to me by 7. He ended the call. He sat in the silence of his apartment, in the city that didn't sleep, and he understood with complete clarity that he had just made a decision that could not be unmade. Not the call to Castellano. The call to Castellano was just paperwork. The decision had been made somewhere earlier in the night, maybe when he read page 53 the 4th time, or maybe when Marco asked she good people and he had answered without having to think about it, or maybe earlier than that, maybe at 4 in the morning on a kitchen floor, when he sat across from a woman who looked at him without fear and without calculation and said, "You have obligations to people much more dangerous than me," and meant it as a reason for him to leave rather than a bid for him to stay. He had spent 14 years building an empire that was supposed to give him choices. He had not, until this moment, understood that the empire had been doing the opposite, closing off his options one by one, very slowly, replacing them with obligations dressed up as power. He picked up the contract from his desk and put it in the bottom drawer. Then he went to the kitchen and stood in the dark and looked at the floor where she had been sitting 12 hours ago, the marble still perfect, no sign of the risotto bowl, no sign that anything had happened there at all, except that everything had. His phone buzzed. Marco again. "If you do this, you better know what you're doing." He typed back, "I rarely do. That's never stopped either of us." He set the phone on the counter. Outside, the city was doing what it always did. Moving, indifferent, enormous, full of people making decisions in the dark that they would have to live with in the light. He had always considered himself someone who operated above that particular chaos. He had always believed that the difference between him and other men was that he made choices with his eyes fully open. Standing in the dark kitchen at 3 in the morning, he was not entirely sure that was still true. He was not sure that what he was doing was rational or strategic or even explicable in the terms he had always used to explain himself to himself. What he was sure of was this, that in 14 years of running an organization built on leverage and calculation and the careful management of fear, the most honest thing anyone had said to him was said by a woman sitting on a marble floor eating cold risotto. What you give comes with what you are, whether you mean it to or not. He was beginning to think she might be right about that, and he was beginning to think that the question of what he was, the real question, underneath the empire and the reputation and the contracts and the carefully managed fear, was something he had been avoiding for a very long time. At 3:47 in the morning, his phone rang. Not Marco, not Castellano. The number on the screen was an Italian country code he recognized immediately. Enzo Bellucci did not call people at 3:47 in the morning unless he already knew something he wasn't supposed to know yet. Damiano stared at the phone for 2 full rings. Then he answered it. "Enzo," he said. The voice on the other end was warm and unhurried, the voice of a man who had been awake for exactly as long as he had planned to be awake. "Damiano," Enzo said, "I think we need to talk about what you're planning to do. Before you do something that makes what comes next, before I do something that makes what comes next unavoidable," Damiano said, finishing the sentence Enzo had left open. A pause. Not a surprised pause. A deliberate one. "You're quick," Enzo said. "You always were." "It's 4 in the morning, Enzo. Say what you called to say." The warmth in Enzo's voice did not waver. That was the thing about him. The warmth was not performed exactly, but it was also not genuine in any way that mattered. It was structural. It was the warmth of a man who had learned at some point very early in his life that people trusted warmth more than they trusted competence, and that being trusted was more useful than being feared. "I called," Enzo said, "because I have a great deal of respect for you, and because I think you are about to make a decision based on incomplete information. Which clause are you referring to?" Another pause, slightly shorter. "Paragraph 31, Enzo said. "Your lawyer called mine. I know what you found. Then you know why I'm pulling out. I know what you think the clause means." Enzo's voice shifted, not colder exactly, but more precise. The warmth dialed back just enough to reveal what was underneath it, which was not malice, but something more efficient than malice. Pure calculation. "What I'm calling to tell you is that the clause was not my idea. It was Serafina's." Damiano said nothing. "She insisted on it," Enzo continued. 3 months ago, when we were finalizing terms. She wanted protection. She is 26 years old, and she is marrying a man she has met 11 times, and she wanted a mechanism that ensured she would not walk away from this marriage with nothing if it failed. A pause. I approved it because she is my daughter and she asked me to, not because I was building a trap. Damiano stood in the dark kitchen. His hand was loose around the phone. His breathing was steady. You expect me to believe, he said carefully, that a clause which gives your family controlling interest in 3 shipping companies in the event of a dissolution was drafted as a protection for your daughter. I expect you, Enzo said, to verify it before you do something irreversible. How? Ask Serafina. The line was quiet for a moment. She's awake? Damiano said. She's been awake since midnight. She knows you didn't get on the plane. A pause. She's not a fool, Damiano. She has never been a fool. She knew something was wrong when you left the signing room. She has been waiting for this call since 1 a.m. Damiano turned and looked out the kitchen window. The city. The lights. The particular darkness between buildings that wasn't really darkness, just a lower grade of luminescence. Put her on, he said. The line went quiet for 4 seconds. Then the sound changed. The ambient quality of it shifted, from the studied stillness of Enzo's side to something different, smaller room, tighter acoustics. Damiano, Serafina said. Her voice was not warm. It was not cold. It was exactly what it always was. Controlled and precise and faintly impatient, the voice of someone who was very good at sounding like they were not waiting for something. Serafina, my father told you about the clause. He told me it was your idea. It was. No hesitation. Do you want me to explain it, or do you want to spend the next 10 minutes telling me why you don't believe me? He said nothing. I'll explain it, she said. I have been engaged to you for 3 years. In those 3 years, you and I have had 11 meetings, of which 8 were business dinners with our fathers present, and 3 were what I suppose qualified as private conversations, though each of them lasted less than 40 minutes. I do not know you. You do not know me. We are marrying for strategic reasons, which both of us understood from the beginning. She paused. I am not naive about what this marriage is, but I'm also not willing to be left without recourse if it fails. The clause was my attempt to ensure that I was not simply an asset transfer in a deal that stopped being useful. Damiano listened to this. That's a reasonable position, he said. Yes, she said. It is. It's also a reasonable position for your father to hide behind. The line went very quiet. I beg your pardon, Serafina said. The temperature dropped noticeably. I'm not questioning your account, he said. I'm telling you that from where I'm standing, I cannot separate your account from the version your father would want me to hear, because those 2 things are identical. A long pause. You think my father used me, Serafina said. Not a question, the precise, flat tone of someone who has just been handed a thought they hadn't fully considered and is now holding it at arm's length to look at it. I think your father approved a clause that benefits him in a way that goes well beyond protecting you, and I think you may not know whether he shaped the idea or simply executed it. The line was silent for 15 seconds. I need to call you back, Serafina said. She ended the call. Damiano set the phone on the counter and stood in the kitchen and breathed. At 6:40 in the morning, Castellano arrived with the withdrawal draft. He laid it on the study desk without ceremony, sat across from Damiano, and looked at him with the expression of a man who had made peace with his own professional mortality. If you sign this, Castellano said, we need to move assets before close of business today. If Bellucci's people get to certain accounts before we restructure, how long do we have? 6 hours. Maybe 8 if they're slow. They won't be slow. Damiano looked at the withdrawal notice. It was 2 pages. Very clean. He had written enough of these to know that the cleaner they were, the more dangerous they were. There was nothing in a clean document for anyone to negotiate around. The Salerno ports, he said. Can we move the holding structure? We can shift the nominal ownership, yes, but the operational contracts, those stay with us regardless of who holds the paper. I know. He tapped the desk. Do the shift. Today. That's going to be visible. To whom? To anyone who's watching the filing systems in Rome, which includes 3 people on Bellucci's payroll who work in the registration office. Damiano looked at him. I know, Castellano. I've known for 4 years. I left them in place because their presence was useful. Today, they become a liability. He picked up his pen. Get me the names of whoever we have watching their watchers. Castellano opened his briefcase and pulled out a second folder. Inside was a single sheet. 4 names, handwritten, which was always how the most sensitive documents were kept in Damiano's organization. Nothing that needed to be found should ever be typed. Damiano looked at the names. He looked at the third one. Then he looked at Castellano. Renata Voss, he said. Castellano said nothing. She's been feeding us the filing information for 14 months, Damiano said. Yes. She's Enzo's goddaughter. A pause. Yes. How did we turn her? Money, Castellano said. And a situation involving her brother that we were able to resolve. Damiano set the paper down. He thought about this. He thought about a woman who had been compromised by her brother's situation and had been turned into an asset by the Moretti family, and who had been feeding information about Enzo Bellucci's Rome operation for 14 months, and whose name was on a handwritten list in a folder that Castellano kept in his briefcase. If Enzo finds out we have her, he said, he doesn't find out. That's the entire structure of how she operates. Castellano. He looked at him steadily. If Enzo finds out we have her, the first thing he does is feed us bad information through her. Verifiable bad information that we act on. And then he points to the consequences and tells everyone who is watching that Moretti made a strategic error based on faulty intelligence. He paused. Has it occurred to you that some of what she's given us might already be managed? Castellano's face did something complicated. When? Damiano said. We flagged one instance 6 weeks ago, Castellano said. An asset report she provided that didn't match what our own surveillance 6 weeks ago. We investigated. It appeared to be an honest error. Castellano. His voice was very quiet now, completely flat. You flagged a potential intelligence compromise 6 weeks ago, investigated it, concluded it was an error, and did not bring it to me. The room was very still. I didn't want to concern you during the wedding negotiations, Castellano said. Damiano looked at him for a long time, long enough for Castellano to understand precisely the weight of what he had just admitted. Get out, Damiano said. Damiano? You can leave the folder. Get out of my apartment. I'll tell you what you still have a job when I've decided. Castellano got up. He left the folder. He left without saying anything else, which was, Damiano thought, probably the first good decision he had made in 6 weeks. Marco arrived 40 minutes later. He did not knock. He had a key, had always had a key, and he let himself in and walked directly to the study and stood in the doorway and looked at Damiano's face and said, What happened? Damiano told him. All of it. The clause, Enzo's call, Serafina, Renata Voss, and the 6-week gap. He told it in sequence, without emphasis, the way you lay out evidence. Not to make a case, but to see what the shape of it was when it was all in the same place. Marco listened without interrupting. When Damiano finished, Marco sat down in the chair Castellano had vacated and was quiet for a long moment. If Enzo has been feeding us managed intelligence through Voss for 6 weeks, Marco said, then everything we've acted on in the last 6 weeks needs to be re-examined, Damiano said. The Hamburg expansion. Yes. The Calabria negotiation. Yes. The political contact we made through all of it. He stood up. Get me a list of every significant operational decision made in the last 8 weeks. Everyone. I want to know which ones used Voss information and which ones came from independent sources. Marco pulled out his phone and started typing. Then he stopped. Damiano? He said. What? The senator. Damiano looked at him. Marco set his phone face down on the desk. 3 weeks ago, the meeting in Washington that we arranged through the contact Voss identified, the senator who sits on the Port Authority Oversight Committee. Damiano had gone very still. We went to that meeting, Marco said quietly. We disclosed our interest in the Salerno expansion. We provided documentation of the financial structure. To a contact we reached through Voss. Yes. They looked at each other. They ashmi sham. If that contact was Enzo's, Damiano said slowly, then Enzo has documentation of our expansion plans, our financial structure, and the names of our political contacts provided to him directly by us at a meeting we arranged ourselves. Marco's voice was completely steady, which was the way he talked when things were very bad. And if he passes that documentation to the right federal office, it's not a war, Damiano said. It's a prosecution. The word landed in the room like something dropped from a height. He doesn't need to beat you, Marco said. He just needs to hand you to someone who can. Damiano walked to the window. He stood there with his hands in his pockets and looked at the city and processed what had just become clear. Not anger. He had moved past anger somewhere in the last 30 seconds, into the colder space on the other side of it, the space where everything was just terrain to be navigated. Enzo Bellucci had not been trying to steal his ports. He had been building a case. The marriage had been the cover for it, the due diligence process, the document exchange, the formal meetings that required Damiano's people to put things in writing. Every signed document, every disclosed asset, every conversation had around that mahogany table in Florence was potentially discoverable material. And now, through Voss and through the Washington meeting, Enzo had what he needed to take it somewhere beyond the criminal world, somewhere that Damiano's particular form of power became not just useless but actively dangerous. He was never going to marry Serafina to me, Damiano said. Not to Marco, to the window, to the city. No, Marco said. He was going to get close enough to make me visible, and then he was going to hand me to the federal government and watch me disappear. He paused. And he was going to do it with documentation I provided, signed and filed. Marco said nothing. That's elegant, Damiano said. He said it with something that was not admiration exactly, but was its cold-eyed cousin. That's genuinely elegant. 40 years of doing this, and he's still finding new shapes for the same knife. What do we do? First thing, he turned from the window. Find out how much of the Voss material was compromised. Specifically, I need to know exactly what Enzo has and exactly how he got it. I need to know who he's talked to in Washington and what version of the documentation they have. That could take days, not weeks. We don't have weeks. He moved to the desk. Second thing, the withdrawal notice. I'm signing it this morning, but the language needs to change. He picked up the draft and looked at it. Right now it cites the clause as a material misrepresentation. I want it to cite a general failure of good faith in the negotiation process. Broader, harder to counter specifically. That gives him less to respond to directly, Marco said, following the logic, and makes the record harder to read. If this ends up in front of anyone reviewing the negotiation history, I don't want a single line of our documentation to look like we were surprised by something we should have caught earlier. Marco nodded. And the Washington contact. We find out who he actually is. Today. Damiano picked up his pen. And if he's Enzo's, we figure out what we gave him that he can use and we start building the counter before he decides to use it. Damiano. Marco leaned forward. If Enzo has what you think he has, building a counter is not enough. He has to be discredited before he can use it, which means, I know what it means. It means going after Enzo directly, not defensively, offensively, and doing it fast enough that anything he tries to present looks like retaliation rather than evidence. I know. That is a different kind of war than you've ever fought. Damiano looked at him. Is that a question or an observation? An observation. Then observe this. He signed the withdrawal notice, handed it to Marco. I've been fighting the wrong war for 6 months. I've been negotiating with a man who was never negotiating back. The deal was never the point. He was building a scaffold the entire time, and I was handing him the lumber. He looked at the document in Marco's hand. Now he finds out what I do when I stop being polite. Marco took the document. He looked at it. Then he looked at Damiano and said, "The girl." Damiano waited. Serafina called this office 20 minutes ago, Marco said. She has been trying to reach you since 5 a.m. What did she say? She said she found something in her father's files. She wouldn't tell me what. She said she would only tell you. He paused. She sounded... He stopped, searching for the word. What? Scared, Marco said. And she didn't sound like someone performing scared. She sounded like someone who had been looking at something for an hour and had finally understood what it was. Damiano was very still for a moment. "Get her on the phone," he said. Marco dialed. He held the phone out. Damiano took it. "Serafina," he said. Her voice, when it came, was completely different from the last time he had spoken to her. The controlled precision was gone. What was left underneath it was raw in a way he had not expected. Not hysteria, but the sharpness of someone who had just had something ripped away. "He has a file," she said without preamble. "My father. In his private safe. I know the combination because he changed it on my birthday 6 years ago and used my birth date and never changed it again, because he never thought I would look." Her voice was very tight. "Damiano, there is a file with your name on it. It goes back 4 years. It has financial documents, surveillance reports, a memo from a federal attorney's office. Serafina." He kept his voice steady. "Take a breath." "There is a letter," she said. "From my father to someone in Washington, dated 3 months ago. 3 months ago, Damiano, before we had even finalized the engagement, he was already—" She stopped. Her voice had the quality of someone pressing very hard against something that was trying to come through. "He was already planning what comes after the deal falls through. There was never a deal. He was never going to let this happen." Damiano said nothing. He looked at the window, at the city, at the morning light that had arrived while he wasn't watching. "He used me," Serafina said. The words came out very flat, not a question. The sound of someone setting down something heavy after carrying it for a very long time. "He used me to get close enough to you to build something that would end you. And he never—" She stopped. "He never once considered what that would make me when it came out." He listened to her breathe. "Did you take the file?" he said. "Yes." "Where are you?" "My room, the villa." "How long before your father wakes up?" 2 hours, maybe less." "You need to leave the villa," he said immediately. "Right now. Don't take anything except the file and your phone. There's a car—" "I know how to move without being seen," she said sharply, with a flash of the old Serafina. "I have lived in this house for 26 years. I know every exit." "Good. I'm going to give you a number. You call it when you're out of the building, and you tell whoever answers that Damiano sent you. Do you understand?" "Yes." He gave her Ren's number. He told her to remember it, not write it down. She repeated it back to him once, perfectly, and then said, "Damiano." "Yes." "I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't know." He thought about what to say to that. He thought about a woman who had spent 3 years being engaged to a man she barely knew, believing it was a business arrangement, not knowing it was a weapon her father was building. He thought about what it felt like to be the instrument of something you didn't understand. "I know," he said. "Go, now." She ended the call. He handed the phone back to Marco. Marco was watching him with the careful attention of someone monitoring a situation for signs of which direction it was about to break. "She's coming here?" Marco said. "She's coming somewhere safe, not here." He looked at the desk. "Enzo wakes up in 2 hours. When he finds the file gone and Serafina gone, he knows we have what he has. Which means the timetable moves," Marco said. "Everything moves." Damiano picked up the withdrawal notice. Signed, clean, devastating. He's not going to wait now. He's going to act. Today. With what? The Washington contact, the documentation from the meeting. He doesn't need the file anymore. The file was insurance. He still has the primary material. He looked at Marco. "Call Ren. Tell him to move the secondary accounts before noon. Tell him to assume all domestic lines are monitored and use the channel we set up for Lisbon." Marco was already dialing. Damiano walked out of the study and down the hall. He passed the door to the guest suite. It was closed. He stopped. From inside, very faint, he could hear the sound of movement. The particular sound of someone getting up slowly, carefully, the way people move when they've been awake for a long time and their body is reminding them of it. He raised his hand and knocked once, very lightly. The movement stopped. Then the door opened. Lucia stood in the doorway in yesterday's clothes, dark circles under her eyes, her hair loose, holding her phone. She looked at him, and something in her face registered that what she was seeing was not the version of him she had met 2 days ago, not the man who had sat on a kitchen floor with her in the dark and promised to pay for her mother's surgery. What she was seeing now was something underneath that version, something that had been there a long time and had not been directed at her yet. "What's happening?" she said, quietly, directly. "I need you to pack a bag," he said. "Whatever you need for a few days. You're going somewhere else until this is resolved." She looked at him for a long moment, not frightened, not performing calm, actually taking in what he was saying and processing it in real time. "What did you do?" she said. "I made a decision that someone is going to respond to. And until I know the shape of the response, I need to know you're not here. Because I'm a liability." "Because you're a civilian," he said. "And I should have moved you 2 days ago, and I didn't, and that was my mistake." She held his gaze. Then she said, "If I go somewhere, my mother's surgery, Dr. Alvarado, is already arranged. It doesn't change." "You're sure?" "I'm sure." She looked at him a moment longer. Then she stepped back from the door and said, "Give me 10 minutes." He nodded and turned back toward the study. He had walked 4 steps when she said, "Damiano?" He stopped. "Whatever you're about to do," she said from the doorway behind him, "make sure you're doing it because it's right, not because you're angry." He stood there with his back to her. "And if you're doing it because you're angry," she said, "at least make sure the anger is about something worth being angry about." He didn't respond. He walked back to the study. He sat down at the desk. He looked at the city. The morning was fully arrived now, pale and certain, and in it Damiano Moretti could see with complete clarity the shape of what Enzo Bellucci had built over 4 years and what it was going to take to dismantle it, and what it was going to cost, and what kind of man would be left standing when the cost had been paid. He was not entirely sure he knew the answer to that last part yet, but he was beginning to suspect that the answer mattered more than the cost. And that was a thought he had never had before in 14 years of doing this, which meant something had changed in him already, quietly and without ceremony, in the space between a kitchen floor at 4 in the morning and this desk at 7 a.m. in the full and unforgiving light of a Wednesday in Manhattan. His phone rang. Unknown number. Manhattan area code. He picked it up. "Mr. Moretti," said a voice he didn't recognize. Male, professional, the careful neutral tone of someone trained to deliver information without inflection. "My name is Assistant Special Agent Karen, Federal Bureau of Investigation. We'd like to schedule a conversation at your earliest convenience. We have some questions about a series of financial transactions conducted through a shell holding company registered in your name in the Cayman Islands that we believe you'll want to discuss before this goes." Damiano did not move for 3 full seconds after the agent finished the sentence. Not because he was afraid. He had been called by federal investigators before, twice in 14 years, both times fishing expeditions with no real bait. He knew what a real threat sounded like, and he knew what a performance of a threat sounded like, and he was trying, in those 3 seconds, to determine which one this was. "Agent Karen," he said. "You said Assistant Special Agent." A pause. "That's correct." "Not Special Agent, not Senior Agent, Assistant Special Agent." Another pause, slightly less comfortable than the first. The rank tells me you're not the one making this call because you want to," Damiano said. "You're making it because someone above you told you to make it before 7 a.m. on a Wednesday, which means the timeline was set by someone else, which means this is not a standard investigative inquiry. Someone is pushing this." He kept his voice completely level. "So I'll ask you directly, Agent Karen. Who made the referral?" Silence. Longer than it should have been. "I'm not in a position to kish. Was it Enzo Bellucci or someone working for him?" The silence this time was different, tighter. "Mr. Moretti, I'd strongly suggest you consult with— I have 11 lawyers. I'll consult with all of them. In the meantime, I want you to go back to whoever gave you this number this morning and tell them that the documentation they provided came from a source with a demonstrable financial conflict of interest and a 14-month history of strategic manipulation." He paused. "Tell them I have the file. They'll know what that means." He ended the call. He set the phone down on the desk and pressed both palms flat against the surface and looked at them for a moment, Steady, both of them, which he noted as a fact the way you note weather. Information about conditions. Marco appeared in the doorway. He had heard enough. FBI, Marco said. Someone made a referral, this morning, hours after I didn't get on the plane. Damiano straightened. Enzo didn't wait. He didn't wait to see what I'd do. He already had the referral queued. Which means the call from Florence last night was not an attempt to stop me. It was a delay. He looked at Marco. He called to give himself enough time to make sure everything was in place before the withdrawal notice landed. Marco's jaw tightened. He wanted you to think you still had a choice. While the choice was already gone, Damiano picked up the withdrawal notice from the desk. Signed, Ready. Send it anyway. Damiano, if federal investigators are now involved, sending the withdrawal notice today is going to look like I withdrew from a negotiation I discovered was conducted in bad faith, which is exactly what it is. Send it. He looked at Marco. And I need you to get me Harlan Webb. Marco blinked. Just once. Barely. But Damiano caught it. Harlan Webb was not a lawyer in the conventional sense. He was a former federal prosecutor who had left the Department of Justice 12 years ago under circumstances that were never fully explained, and had since built a practice that operated in the narrow and lucrative space between legitimate legal defense and the kind of strategic maneuvering that required someone who understood both sides of the wall from direct experience. He was expensive. He was difficult. He did not return calls from people he didn't respect, and he didn't respect most people. He and Damiano had met once, 7 years ago, at a dinner that neither of them had wanted to attend. They had spent 40 minutes in a corner talking about nothing, a horse race, the architecture of a courthouse in Baltimore, the specific way that certain institutional systems created incentives for exactly the behavior they were designed to prevent. Harlan had left his card without being asked. Damiano had kept it without knowing why. Webb hasn't taken a criminal defense case in 3 years, Marco said. He'll take this one. How do you know? Because this isn't a criminal defense case. Damiano moved to the window. It's a counterintelligence problem dressed up as one. And Harlan Webb has spent his whole career waiting for a problem that's actually interesting. Marco pulled out his phone. And while you do that, Damiano said, I need you to find out exactly who in Washington received documentation from the meeting 3 weeks ago. Not the senator contact. Go above him. Who did he report to? Who did that person contact? I need the chain. That's going to require, I know what it's going to require. Do it anyway. Marco nodded and stepped back into the hallway. Damiano stood at the window. He watched the city do what it always did at this hour. The particular organized chaos of 7:15 a.m., the delivery trucks, the early commuters, the small army of people who kept the infrastructure of the place operational and invisible. He had always found something clarifying about watching the city from above, something that helped him remember the scale of things. It was hard to feel personally devastated when you were looking at 8 million lives moving simultaneously. It was less clarifying than usual this morning. The scale felt different, closer. He turned away from the window and walked down the hall. Lucia was coming out of the guest suite with a bag on her shoulder. Small, dark green. The kind of bag that held 3 days of necessities and nothing more. The bag of someone who knew exactly what they actually needed without overpacking. She had changed into clean clothes and pulled her hair back, and she looked, in a way that was probably entirely unintentional, absolutely composed. Not the expensive composed of someone who had been trained to look a certain way under pressure. The actual composed of someone who had had enough hard days that they no longer wasted energy on visible panic. She looked at him when he came out of the study. Her eyes went to his face and stayed there. You made some calls, she said. Several. Bad news. Some of it. She adjusted the strap of the bag on her shoulder. Is my mother safe? The hospital? The arrangement? I put it through a trust structure 2 days ago. It's not connected to anything with my name on it directly. Whatever happens with me in the next few days doesn't touch that. She nodded slowly. Then she said, What happens with you in the next few days? He looked at her. He thought about how much to say and decided that was the wrong question. She was standing in a hallway with a bag because of decisions he'd made, and she deserved to understand the shape of the thing, even if not all the details. "Someone has been building a case against me," he said, "using documents I signed, meetings I attended, a contact I trusted. Federal investigators called this morning." She was quiet for a moment. "Did you do what they're saying you did?" she said. He looked at her directly. "I've done a great many things in my life that are illegal. Probably not the specific thing they're going to say I did, because the specific thing is likely constructed rather than discovered. But the honest answer to your question is complicated." She held his gaze. "That's a more honest answer than I expected." "You have a way of making me give those," he said. A beat passed between them. In the hallway, in the apartment that was now being held very still by the weight of what was happening outside it. "Where am I going?" she said. "There's a building on the Upper West Side, residential. One of my people manages the property. The unit on the 9th floor has been vacant for 6 months. No connection to me on the public record." He paused. "You'll have everything you need. Ren will drive you." "And you?" "I'll be here." She looked at him for a long moment. "You should eat something before whatever comes next," she said. "You look like you haven't slept." "I haven't." "That's not a point of pride." "I'm aware." She shifted the bag. She started walking toward the door. She stopped. "Damiano?" She didn't turn around. Her back was straight. The bag was very still on her shoulder. "Yes." "Boom. Don't make decisions that can't be undone because you're trying to protect me," she said. "I have survived a great deal without anyone's protection. If you do something irreversible for my sake, that becomes mine to carry, and I'm already carrying enough." He said nothing. She walked to the door and left. The apartment had never felt as quiet as it did in the 30 seconds after she closed it. Harlan Webb arrived at 11:47 a.m. He came alone, which was either a sign of confidence or a sign that he didn't want witnesses to the conversation. He was 61 years old, lean in the way that suggested he had once been heavier and had lost the weight through something other than intention, with gray eyes that moved constantly and hands that were always slightly ahead of the rest of him, reaching for things. A chair back, the edge of a desk, the lapel of his own jacket, as though he needed to physically confirm that the surfaces around him were where he expected them to be. He sat down across from Damiano's desk without being invited to sit and said, "You sounded calm on the phone." "I am calm." "That's either very good or very concerning." He opened a leather portfolio. He didn't look at it. "Tell me about the Cayman structure." Damiano told him. All of it. The shell company, which had been set up 7 years ago by a financial manager named Trent, who had since died of a stroke. The transactions that would look irregular to an investigator who didn't know their purpose, and the specific documentation that had been generated through the Washington meeting 3 weeks ago, and that Enzo Bellucci had likely provided as the initial referral material. Webb listened without writing anything down. He had a quality Damiano recognized, the quality of someone who was doing most of their real work internally, processing while appearing simply to receive. When Damiano finished, Webb was quiet for a moment. "How many people know about Renata Voss?" he said. 4, including you." "The file Serafina took from Florence." "Physical file. She has it. She's in a location controlled by my people. She stays there until I say otherwise." He finally looked at the portfolio. He turned a page. "The federal contact, Karen. He's a mid-level agent in the Organized Crime Division. He's been attached to a task force that has been looking at East Coast syndicate financial structures for about 18 months. This referral didn't come from him originally. He got it from above him, which means it went in through a political channel." He looked up. "That's your leverage." "Political referrals to federal investigations are documented," Damiano said. "The referral itself is. The source of the referral is usually not. But the timing of this one is aggressive. They called you at 6:50-something in the morning on a Wednesday, 12 hours after you didn't get on a plane back to Florence. That's not an investigation that's been running for months finding its moment. That's someone pressing a button on short notice." Webb closed the portfolio. "If I can establish that the referral was politically motivated and that the primary evidence came from a source with a documented conflict of interest, I can create enough procedural doubt to slow this down significantly." "How significantly?" "Enough time for you to do whatever you're planning to do." Damiano looked at him. I haven't told you what I'm planning to do. No, Webb said, and I haven't asked. What I'm telling you is that I can buy you time. What you do with that time is your business. He stood up. I need the Voss documentation, everything you have, and I need access to the financial manager's original setup files for the Cayman structure. Death notwithstanding, there will be archived materials somewhere. Castellano has the archive. Not Castellano anymore. Webb looked at him evenly. A 6-week gap in disclosure is a liability I can't manage. He stays away from this. Damiano nodded once. Webb picked up his portfolio and moved toward the door. He stopped with his hand on the frame and said, without turning, "The girl." Damiano waited. If she becomes visible in this, if anyone connects her to you in a context that looks like a motivation for the withdrawal, she won't. You're sure? I'm sure. Webb turned just enough to look at him over his shoulder. He had the gray eyes of someone who had spent 30 years in rooms where people said things they couldn't prove, and who had developed as a result a very precise instinct for the difference between confidence and wish. Whatever he saw, he nodded. He left. By 2 p.m., Marco had the chain. He laid it out on the desk in front of Damiano. Not documents, not files, just handwritten notes, because that was how they moved information when they were most exposed. The Washington contact from the meeting 3 weeks ago was a man named Ferris, who operated as a political consultant, but whose actual function, Marco had determined through 3 separate conversations conducted in the last 4 hours, was as an intermediary between private parties seeking federal attention and specific officials within 2 oversight committees. Ferris had received their documentation from the meeting. Ferris had delivered a summary of it to a senior staff member on the Senate Financial Oversight Committee. That staff member had a documented social relationship, dinners, a shared membership at a private club in Georgetown, with a deputy director in the DOJ's Organized Crime Division. There it is, Damiano said. 3 steps, Marco said. Bellucci to Ferris, to the committee staff, to the DOJ. Clean enough to look legitimate, dirty enough that if you pull any single link hard, the chain falls apart. We pull Ferris. Damiano sat forward. What do we have on Ferris? Marco's expression shifted slightly. That depends on what you mean by have. What do we know about him that he doesn't want known? He has a tax situation, Marco said. 2 years of undeclared consulting income from 3 foreign clients. It's not federal-level exposure on its own, but if someone chose to refer it, don't. Damiano shook his head. That's what Enzo does. I'm not doing this by threatening Ferris into silence. I need him discredited, not coerced. He looked at the notes. Who are the 3 foreign clients? Marco told him. Damiano listened to the names and sat with them for a moment. The second one, he said, that's a Ukrainian energy company with a federal sanctions review pending. Yes. If Ferris received consulting income from a company under a sanctions review, that's a voluntary disclosure issue, potentially a material one. He looked at Marco. He doesn't know we know. No. We don't threaten him. We inform him. We make contact, through a lawyer, formally, and we let him know that his name appears in materials we're preparing for a procedural challenge to the federal referral, and that his financial relationships with foreign clients may become discoverable in that process. He paused. We give him the opportunity to reconsider what information he's provided and to whom. Marco looked at him. That's not pulling a link. That's applying enough pressure that the link removes itself. Yes? That is a distinction without much practical difference. It's a distinction Harlan Webb can work with, which is the one that matters. Marco wrote something down. Then he said, There's something else. Damiano waited. Enzo called Serafina this morning. She didn't answer. He's called 6 times. Marco looked at the notes. 2 hours ago, he called the villa security team directly. When they told him Serafina had left in the night, Marco paused. He had 2 of the security team removed. On the spot. Removed? Replaced. Immediately. By people we don't have background on. Damiano absorbed this. He's locking down. He knows the file is gone. He knows she has it. He knows she came to us. Marco set the notes down. He's going to move the original plan forward faster than he intended. If he had a timeline of 2 weeks, he now has 2 days. Then we have one. Damiano stood up. Get me the full list of Bellucci's political relationships, everything we have, European and domestic, especially anyone who has exposure, anyone who took money, anyone who has a relationship they wouldn't want examined. He moved to the window. Enzo built this by making himself look legitimate. The investigation into me is supposed to look like a law enforcement action, not a criminal attack. If we can establish publicly that the referral originated from a source that is itself under investigation, then the narrative flips, Marco said. He's not exposing a criminal. He's a criminal using federal infrastructure as a weapon. And everything he submits becomes tainted by the source. Damiano looked at the city. We don't fight this in court. We fight it in the public record. We make it impossible for anyone in Washington to touch this without being associated with Enzo Bellucci's mess. Marco was quiet for a moment. That requires us to put Bellucci's name into public channels, which means he finds out in real time. Yes, and responds. Yes. This stops being a legal problem at that point. It already stopped being a legal problem when he called the FBI at 6 in the morning. Damiano turned from the window. He made this a war. I'm choosing the terrain. Marco looked at him steadily. The terrain you're choosing is public, visible, no cover. Correct. Everything we do is going to be on record. That's the point. Marco held his gaze for another moment. Then he nodded, once, the nod of someone who had made the calculation and decided to go. He picked up the phone. The afternoon moved like a coiled thing, tight, fast, the hours collapsing into each other. By 4 p.m., Harlan Webb had filed 2 procedural motions with the court that would, at minimum, delay any formal investigation for 30 days and require full disclosure of the referral source. By 5, Marco's contact had reached Ferris. By 5:40, Ferris's lawyer had called Webb's office and expressed an interest in discussing the scope of their client's involvement in passing along what was, the lawyer stressed, only preliminary and unverified information. At 6 p.m., Enzo Bellucci's office in Florence released a formal statement to Italian financial press expressing surprise and disappointment at the withdrawal of the Moretti engagement and hinting, in the carefully structured language of someone who had prepared this statement in advance, at concerns about the Moretti organization's stability and trustworthiness as a partner. Marco brought the statement to Damiano printed on a single sheet of paper. Damiano read it once. He set it down. He moved first, Marco said. Yes. He's trying to establish the narrative before we do. Yes. Damiano looked at the statement. He's also scared. A patient man doesn't release a statement 6 hours after the withdrawal notice lands. A patient man waits. He waits to see what we do. He's not waiting. He set the paper down. He knows Serafina has the file. He knows we have Renata Voss's information. He knows his leverage in Washington is weakening. So he's going to the press because it's the one weapon he has left that doesn't require what he has in his files to be airtight. Then we respond. We don't respond to the statement. Damiano shook his head. We release the documentation from Serafina's file. Specifically, the letter to the Washington contact dated 3 months ago. We give it to 2 journalists, not a press release, not a statement, an exclusive, 2 different outlets. We let them report it as an investigative find. Marco stared at him. If we do that, it's out. I know. It's public and it's permanent and there's no taking it back. Damiano looked at him. Enzo spent 4 years building something slow and invisible. I'm going to take it and put it in the light in 48 hours. He has no defense for speed. He built this for patience. And the federal investigation. Webb's motions buy us 30 days. 30 days from now, the story of who referred this investigation and why is going to be significantly more complicated than it looks today. He paused. If I'm right about what's in that file. And if you're not. Damiano said nothing for a moment. The honest silence of a man who had made a decision without a safety net and was not going to pretend otherwise. Then I'm not, he said, and we find another way. Marco looked at him. Then he picked up his phone. At 7:15, Wren called from the Upper West Side unit. He said Lucia was settled. He said she had eaten something and made tea and was reading and had asked him 3 questions about the situation, all 3 of which were, he noted, exactly the right 3 questions. Damiano stood in the kitchen after the call ended, in the same place he had stood 2 nights ago, and looked at the marble floor. His phone buzzed, a number he didn't recognize. Different country code this time. Not Italy, Belgium. He answered it. The voice on the line was a woman's, older, careful. "Mr. Moretti," she said, "my name is not something you need right now. What you need is what I'm going to tell you. I work in a capacity I won't specify within the Belgian Financial Regulatory Authority, and I have been reviewing a set of documents for the past 6 weeks that I believe you would find very interesting." Damiano said nothing. He pressed the phone closer to his ear. "Enzo Bellucci has been the subject of an independent financial review in 3 European jurisdictions for the past 14 months, the woman said. A review that predates your engagement, predates his contact with your organization, and predates every document he has recently provided to American federal investigators." She paused. "A review that he has been trying very hard to derail by providing federal investigators in the United States with a domestic target large enough to justify transferring resources and attention." Damiano's hand was very still against the phone. "You're telling me," he said slowly, "that the entire Washington strategy, the referral, the investigation, was designed not primarily to destroy you," the woman said. "Although that was useful. It was designed to pull American investigative attention toward American organized crime and away from a European financial review. That is, if it completes, likely to result in asset freezes across 4 Bellucci-controlled jurisdictions." The kitchen was absolutely silent. "He's not attacking me," Damiano said. "He's using me as a distraction." "Yes," the woman said, which means the federal investigation you are currently managing is not his primary weapon. It is his smokescreen." A pause. "His primary weapon is something else, and it deploys in approximately 18 hours. Damiano's pulse was steady. It had been steady through everything, through the call from Agent Karen, through the revelation of the managed intelligence, through the Ferris chain, and the statement from Florence. It was steady now. But there was a quality to the steadiness that had not been there before, something that was not quite the same as calm. "What deploys in 18 hours, he said. "There is a journalist," the woman said, "a specific journalist, American, who has been provided with a very particular story, not about financial transactions, not about the Cayman structure." She paused again, and in the pause, Damiano felt something cold move through him. Because the pause was the pause of someone who was about to say something and was giving him a half-second to prepare, which was a courtesy you only extended when the thing you were about to say, "What deploys in 18 hours, Damiano said again. His voice was very quiet. The woman on the phone took a breath, not a nervous breath, a deliberate one, the breath of someone who had decided something and was now executing that decision. "A story about a woman," she said. "A housekeeper. Her name, her photograph, her immigration status, her family in Mexico. The story frames her as the reason you withdrew from the Bellucci engagement. It frames her as leverage, as someone you became attached to in a way that compromised your judgment." She paused. "The journalist who received this story is not a tabloid writer. She is an investigative reporter with a publication that reaches the financial and political community your organization depends on for legitimacy. The story is not about romance. It is about weakness. It is designed to tell everyone in your world that Damiano Moretti made a billion-dollar decision because of a housekeeper he felt sorry for, that his judgment cannot be trusted, that he is compromised." Damiano stood in the kitchen and did not move. "When it publishes," the woman continued, "the woman becomes a target, not from Enzo directly, from every organization that sees opportunity in your perceived vulnerability. She becomes the proof of concept. She becomes the thing people point to when they want to demonstrate that you are no longer the man you were." "How do you have this information?" Damiano said. "That is not something I'm prepared to discuss." "Then why are you telling me?" A pause. "Because Enzo Bellucci has been making people invisible for 40 years. I am tired of watching it work." The line went dead. Damiano set the phone on the counter. He looked at it, then he picked it up and called Marco. "I need you here," he said. "Now. I'm 20 minutes out." 15. He ended the call. He stood in the kitchen and looked at the window and thought with complete clarity about the shape of what Enzo had built. All of it laid out now in the light. And he understood that he had been right about the elegance of it, but had not understood until this moment how complete it was. It was not a trap with one mechanism. It was a trap with four, and three of them had been visible enough to occupy his attention, while the fourth one, the one aimed not at him but at her, had been sitting in the dark the whole time, waiting. He called Ren. "The unit," he said. "Elevate the security immediately. No one in or out without my direct authorization. And Ren, if anyone attempts to photograph the building or anyone leaving it, I want to know within 60 seconds. Understood." A pause. "Is she in danger?" "Not yet," Damiano said. "Keep it that way." He ended the call. He stood in the kitchen for exactly 30 more seconds. Then he walked to the study, sat down at the desk, and picked up a pen. He did not write anything. He held the pen and looked at the desk and thought about a woman who had told him 3 days ago that what you give comes with what you are. He thought about what it meant that Enzo had identified her as the lever, not the Cayman structure, not the Washington contacts, not the withdrawal notice. Her. Because Enzo had understood, before Damiano had fully understood it himself, that she was the thing that had actually changed him. Enzo had been watching him for 4 years, and in all of those 4 years, he had never once found anything that looked like a vulnerability. Until 3 days ago, when Damiano had left a signing room at 3 in the morning and flown across an ocean because of a security alert in his kitchen. He set the pen down. He thought about what Lucia had said before she left. "Don't make decisions that can't be undone because you're trying to protect me." The story was going to publish in 18 hours unless he did something that stopped it. And the things that could stop it were not small things. They were not clean things. Marco arrived in 14 minutes. He walked in and read Damiano's face and said, "How bad?" Damiano told him. Marco sat down slowly. He put his hands on his knees and looked at the floor the way he did when he was processing something that had exceeded his expectation of how bad things could get. "The journalist," he said. "Find her." "We can't threaten a journalist." "I'm not going to threaten her. I'm going to give her a better story." Damiano looked at him. "Get me the name of the reporter, and get me everything we pulled together today. The Ferris chain, the European regulatory review documentation, the timeline of the referral, all of it." Marco looked up. "You're going to give it to the press. I'm going to give it to her, specifically, tonight. And I'm going to make the case that the story Enzo fed her is not the story. The story is who fed it and why." He leaned forward. "She's an investigative reporter. She didn't take Enzo's version of this because she wants to run a hit piece. She took it because it looked like a story with documentation. I give her a bigger story with better documentation. And if she runs both, then she runs both. And the second story eats the first because the second one explains the first." He stood up. "Get me the name." Marco was on his phone before he finished the sentence. The name came back in 11 minutes. Claire Beaumont, senior investigative correspondent for a publication that Damiano knew by reputation. Serious, read in the circles that mattered, the kind of outlet that investigative reporters who cared about their work wanted to be published in. She had 2 major exposés in the past 4 years, both of which had resulted in federal investigations of their subjects, which meant she was disciplined, which meant she checked her sources, which meant if he gave her what he had, she would verify it before she ran anything, which meant she would find out that it was real, which meant the 18-hour window was not necessarily fixed. He called her directly. He had gotten her number from Marco, who had gotten it from a contact he refused to name, and he was aware that calling an investigative journalist directly and without warning was the kind of move that either worked immediately or created a new problem. He did not have the time to care which. She answered on the second ring. "Miss Beaumont," he said. A pause, then, "Mr. Moretti." She knew his voice. That meant she had been working this story long enough to have listened to recordings. He noted that. "You've been given information about me," he said. I'd like to give you information about who gave it to you. A silence. Alert rather than startled. I don't discuss my sources, she said. I'm not asking you to. I'm asking for 30 minutes. He kept his voice level. Not to ask you to kill the story, to give you the context that determines what the story actually is. A longer silence. Where? She said. Wherever you choose. She chose a coffee place in Midtown, the kind with good light and enough ambient noise to make surveillance difficult and enough public visibility to make any kind of pressure impractical. She was already there when he arrived, sitting at a corner table with a laptop and a coffee, and the direct measuring gaze of someone who had spent 20 years watching people try to manage her. She was younger than he expected, mid-30s, dark hair, practical clothes, a small voice recorder on the table between them that she turned on without asking his permission. He sat down. He looked at the recorder. He did not ask her to turn it off. You're not what I expected, she said. What did you expect? Someone who wanted something from me. She looked at him. You don't look like you want something. You look like you're making a decision. I've already made it, he said. I'm here because of what comes after. He laid it out for her. Everything. Not in the defensive, strategic way he would have laid it out for a lawyer, but in the straightforward, sequenced way that he recognized, as he was doing it, was the way Lucia told stories. Events in order. No editorializing. Let the shape of the thing speak. He gave her the timeline. The Cayman structure and its actual origin. The Voss intelligence and the 6-week compromise. The Washington meeting and the Ferris chain. The European regulatory review. The phone call from Belgium. And the letter from Enzo's safe, dated 3 months before the engagement was finalized, addressed to a political contact in Washington, outlining in very specific terms what Enzo intended the engagement process to produce and what he intended to do with the documentation once he had it. He slid a copy of the letter across the table. She read it. She read it twice. Her face did not change much. She was practiced at not showing what she was thinking, but her breathing changed, very slightly, the way breathing changes when someone is reading something that is reorganizing their understanding of a situation. This is the source document, she said. Yes. How did you obtain it? From someone who had access to the original and understood what it meant. She looked at him. Serafina Bellucci. He said nothing. Off record, she said. On record, he said. Everything I've given you tonight is on record. She looked at him for a moment. Why? Because Enzo built this in the dark, he said. The only defense against something built in the dark is light. All of it, not selected pieces. If I give you a managed version of this story, you'll see the management and the story dies. If I give you everything and it's true, and it is true, then you have the whole thing and you run what you decide to run. She looked at the letter again. Then she looked at him. The woman, she said. The housekeeper. He looked at her. The information I was given about her, she said. I want to understand where she fits. She doesn't fit, he said. That's the answer. She is a person who works in my home who is in no way connected to the Bellucci situation or to any aspect of my organization. She was identified by Enzo Bellucci as a potential lever because he needed a human element to make a story about financial manipulation look like a story about personal weakness. He held her gaze. She is a woman who has been working 3 jobs to pay for her mother's medical care. She has nothing to do with this. She deserves to not have her photograph in a newspaper. Beaumont was quiet for a moment. You came here for her, she said. Not an accusation, an observation. I came here because Enzo built a trap using documents I signed and meetings I attended and a woman who had nothing to do with any of it. All 3 things are reasons to be here. She looked at the recorder. She looked at the letter. She looked at him. I need 48 hours to verify, she said. You have 36, he said. After that, someone else publishes what Enzo gave them and the context is gone. She picked up the letter. She looked at it one more time. Then she closed her laptop. Go home, Mr. Moretti, she said. It wasn't dismissal. It was the tone of someone who had made their own decision and was ready to go to work. He went home. The 36 hours that followed were the longest of his life, and they were also the quietest. Marco managed the operational pieces. The Ferris situation resolved itself when Ferris's lawyer called Webb and confirmed that their client had been misled about the nature of the documentation he had been asked to pass along and would be providing a corrective statement to the federal investigators. The assistant special agent who had called Damiano at 6 in the morning called again, 30 hours later, with a different tone entirely, to indicate that the referral was being reviewed and that no further contact would be initiated pending that review. The European regulatory process, as the Belgian woman had said, was real and ongoing and accelerating. Enzo Bellucci, in Florence, went very quiet. The kind of quiet that was not peace, but the held breath before something breaks. Serafina stayed in the location Ren had arranged for her. She called once, on the second morning. Damiano answered. "Is it over?" she said. "Almost. My father called me again." "Did you answer?" "No." A pause. "I have been trying to understand," she said, "how I didn't see it for 3 years. How I didn't see what he was doing." Damiano thought about this. "You saw what he showed you," he said. "He's had 40 years of practice at showing people exactly what they need to see to believe the version of him that's useful. That's generous. It's accurate. You're not naive, Serafina. He's just very good." A long pause. "What happens to me now?" she said. "When this is over? My name is in all of this. Your name is in a letter your father wrote before you knew what he was planning. That's a different thing than being complicit." He paused. "You took the file. You warned me. Those are on record too." She was quiet for a moment. "You didn't have to do that." "It's true," he said. "I just made sure it was visible." He heard her exhale. It was a small sound, the sound of someone setting something down. "Take care of yourself, Damiano," she said. "You too," he said. He meant it. Claire Beaumont's story published 34 hours after their meeting. It ran 11,000 words across 2 days. The headline was not about Damiano Moretti. It was about Enzo Bellucci and the 4-year structure he had built around a manufactured alliance, using two families' trust and a federal investigative mechanism as instruments of personal financial protection in the face of a European regulatory action that was, the story noted, citing documentation from 3 independent sources, almost certainly going to result in significant asset seizure. The piece mentioned Damiano in the context of a man who had been a target of the operation, not its subject. His name appeared 14 times. Lucia Navarro's name did not appear once. Damiano read the story at his desk, early morning, 3rd cup of coffee. He read it twice. Then he set it down and sat with it for a while. It was not a victory. It did not feel like one. It felt like the aftermath of something very large, the particular exhausted quiet of a space where a storm has been, when the air is still strange with what was in it. He called Ren. "Bring her home," he said. She came back on a Tuesday afternoon, 7 days after she'd left, with the same dark green bag and the same composed expression and dark circles that had not entirely resolved. She walked through the door and looked at the apartment the way people look at spaces they've been away from, checking it against memory, making small unconscious adjustments. She put the bag down in the hallway. She looked at him. "Your mother," he said. "The surgery was Thursday," she said. "It went well. Dr. Alvarado called me 3 times. He was very thorough." She paused. "She's in recovery. She's going to need 6 weeks of physical therapy." She asked me who paid for it again. I told her the same thing you told me to tell her. "Did she accept it?" "She accepted it less gracefully this time." Something moved in Lucia's face. Not quite a smile, but close enough. "She said she intends to write a letter of thanks to whoever it was. I told her that probably wasn't necessary. She told me that gratitude is always necessary and that I should mind my own business." He looked at her. "She sounds like someone I'd like." "She's nothing like you," Lucia said. "I didn't say she was like me. I said I'd like her." Lucia looked at him for a moment. Then she picked up her bag and started toward the guest suite. She stopped in the hallway, her back to him. "The newspaper," she said. "The story that came out." "Yes." "I wasn't in it." "No." She was quiet for a moment. "You did that." "I gave someone the full picture. What they chose to include was their decision." She turned around slowly. She looked at him with the direct, careful look she used when she was seeing something she wanted to see clearly before she decided what to do with it. "Damiano," she said. "Yes." "Why?" she said. Not the question of someone who didn't know the answer, the question of someone who needed to hear it said out loud in order to know what to do with it. He thought about how to answer that. He thought about all the ways he could answer it that would be technically accurate, but would also maintain the distance between them that had been narrowing, without his permission, since the night he had walked into a kitchen and found her on the floor. He decided he was tired of distance. "Because you were right," he said, "about what I give coming with what I am. And I wanted what I gave you to come from the version of me that was worth something." She looked at him. The hallway was very quiet. "That's not a small thing to say," she said. "No," he said. "It's not." She held his gaze for a long time, long enough that he could see her working through something, the same way she had worked through whether to accept help for her mother, turning it over, looking at all the angles, checking for the price she hadn't been told about yet. "I'm going to need to go home soon," she said, "to Mexico. My mother is going to need help during the therapy. My sister can't manage it alone." "I know. That might take a few months." "I know. And when I come back—" She stopped, started again. "If I come back, Lucia," he said. She looked at him. "Come back," he said. It was not a command, it was not a negotiation. It was the most unguarded thing he had said to another person in longer than he could accurately identify, and he could feel the exact weight of it as it left him. The specific vulnerability of saying a true thing simply and waiting. She looked at him for another long moment. Then she said, "Ask me again in 4 months." "I will. Every day if you have to, if necessary." Something shifted in her face then, all the way this time, not the almost smile, the real one, the one that was a little crooked and arrived more slowly than expected and looked, he thought, like something she had been rationing and had briefly stopped. She picked up her bag. She went to the guest suite. She closed the door. He stood in the hallway for a moment. Then he walked to the kitchen and started making coffee. Real coffee. The pour-over kind. He had watched her do it enough times by now to know the correct speed for the water, the correct height, the small circular motion at the end. He did not know if he got it exactly right, but he got it close enough that when he tasted it, it tasted like something worth the effort. 3 weeks later, Enzo Bellucci's assets in 2 European jurisdictions were frozen pending the completion of the regulatory review. His political contacts in Washington went silent simultaneously and universally, in the way contacts go silent when they have calculated that the person they were connected to has become more liability than asset. The federal inquiry into Damiano's Cayman structure was formally closed without charges, with a brief note in the procedural record indicating that the referral had not been substantiated. Castellano resigned. Damiano accepted his resignation with a short conversation in which he said very little, and Castellano said even less, and which ended with a handshake that both of them understood was a closing of a long chapter rather than a personal rupture. Harlan Webb sent an invoice that was significant enough to be notable even by Damiano's standards. He paid it the same day and sent a note, handwritten, which Webb would understand was not casual. That said only, "Thank you." The problem was actually interesting. Webb sent back a single line. It usually is when the person bringing it is. Marco, who had not slept more than 4 hours on any night during the preceding 3 weeks, took 10 days in Portugal that his wife had been asking him to take for 2 years. He called once from Lisbon on the 7th day to report that the sea was very blue, and he had eaten more grilled fish than a human being should consume, and that he felt for the first time in recent memory something approaching ordinary. "Good," Damiano said. "Don't break anything while I'm gone," Marco said. "I'll try." A pause. "The girl. She went to Mexico?" "Last week." "And?" "And she'll be back in 3 months." A longer pause. "You sound different," Marco said. Not accusatorially, with the particular quality of a man who has known someone for 14 years and is registering a change in register. "Different how?" Damiano said. "Like you're waiting for something," Marco said. "You've never sounded like that before." Damiano looked out the window at the city. At the particular evening light that Manhattan produced in late fall, the light that came in low and flat and turned everything a color that had no good name. "I know," he said. "Go finish your fish." Lucia called from Mexico on a Thursday, 3 weeks after she arrived. She called at 9 in the morning her time, which was 10 in the morning his time, and the connection was slightly uneven, the quality of someone calling from a place with inconsistent coverage. "My mother walked to the kitchen by herself today," she said. "First time since before the surgery. She stood at the stove and made eggs, and she cried the whole time she was making them, but she didn't stop." Damiano was at his desk. He had been reading a contract, a legitimate one, a shipping agreement with a Portuguese firm that Marco had been developing for 2 years, the kind of clean, ordinary business that he was trying to make more of his world and less of the other kind. He set it down. "That's good," he said. "She burned the eggs," Lucia said. "She doesn't care. She made eggs." A pause. "She wrote the letter. She made me send it." "I know," he said. "I received it." A short silence. "She has very good handwriting," he said. Lucia laughed. It was the first time he had heard her laugh. Really laugh. Not the near smile, not the controlled warmth, but the actual unguarded sound of it, which was lower than he expected and lasted longer than he expected and sounded like someone who didn't do it constantly and so meant it completely when she did. "She practices," Lucia said when she stopped. "She says handwriting is respect made visible. She's not wrong. I told her you'd say something like that." "What did she say?" "She said she already liked you." A pause. "I told her not to make decisions based on incomplete information." "What did she say to that?" "She said she raised me too cautiously." Another pause. "She might be right." He looked out the window, the city. Always the city, always there, always moving. "How are you?" he said. Simple question. He had not been in the habit of asking it. She was quiet for a moment. "Tired," she said. "Good tired. The kind that comes from doing things that matter rather than things that are just necessary." A pause. "Different." "Different how?" "Like I'm less afraid of something," she said. "I'm not sure what the something is exactly, but it's quieter than it was." He understood that. He had been noticing something similar in himself in the weeks since everything had resolved. A quality of the silence in the apartment that had changed, had become less like absence and more like space, the difference between empty and open. "Damiano," she said. "Yes. I'm going to be here another 2 months, maybe a little more." "I know." "And when I come back?" She stopped. The connection wavered slightly. "I don't want to come back and be the housekeeper." He was very still. "I mean," she stopped again. "That came out more, but no," he said. "It came out exactly right." A pause. "What did you have in mind?" he said. "I don't know yet," she said. "That's honest. I don't know exactly what it looks like. I just know what it doesn't look like." "That's a start," he said. "Most good things begin with knowing what they're not." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You sound different." Marco said the same thing. What did Marco think was different? He said I sounded like I was waiting for something. And what do you think? He looked at the city, at the evening coming in the way it always did, slow and certain, taking its time. "I think he's right," he said. "For the first time in a long time, I'm not in a hurry. I don't know what to do with that yet, but it doesn't feel wrong." She exhaled. Across the distance, through the uneven connection, he could hear it, the small particular sound of someone letting something go that they had been holding for too long. 2 months, she said. 2 months, he said. "I'll be here." After she hung up, he sat at the desk for a while without doing anything. The contract was still in front of him, the clean, ordinary business of people moving goods across water, the legitimate thing he was trying to build more of. He would get back to it in a minute. He would get back to all of it. The work, the decisions, the daily navigation of a life that was still and would remain complicated. But for a moment, he just sat. He thought about a kitchen floor at 3 in the morning. He thought about cold risotto and a phone call, and a woman who had accepted help with such caution that the caution itself had been the most honest thing he had seen in years. He thought about Marco asking she good people in the dark, and the answer coming without hesitation. And he thought about what it meant that the answer had come that fast, and whether he had known even then what that speed was telling him. He thought about his father, who had built the same empire with the same tools, and had died of a heart attack at 63 with no one in the room, which Damiano had understood at the time as a fact about the kind of life that came with this work and had not questioned until recently. He thought about what it would mean to question it, what it would mean to decide that the thing his father had accepted as the cost of power was not actually the cost of power, but rather a specific choice that specific men had made and that he was not obligated to make. He picked up the contract. He read it. It was a good contract, straightforward and fair, the kind of agreement that both parties had incentive to honor. He signed it. Outside, Manhattan was settling into the particular rhythm of a Thursday evening, the city doing what it always did, indifferent and enormous, 8 million lives moving simultaneously in their own private orbits of difficulty and grace and ordinary persistence. He had lived above it for 11 years and had mostly felt separate from it, like an observer, like someone looking down at the water from a height. He was not sure when that had started to change. He suspected it had started on the night he had come home expecting an enemy and found a woman sitting on his kitchen floor just surviving the way people survive when there is no other option. Quietly, stubbornly, without making it a story, just getting up every morning and doing the next necessary thing. He had spent 14 years being feared. He had spent 14 years being the man who other men calculated around. And none of it, not one day of it, had felt like what he felt now, in the ordinary quiet of a Thursday evening, in an apartment that still had her presence in it in small ways he kept noticing, waiting for 2 months to pass. The most feared man in the American criminal world sat at his desk as the light changed, and thought about eggs burned by a woman who cried through making them because her legs had carried her to the stove, and understood finally, completely, without needing it explained, that this was the thing. This was the whole of it, not the empire, not the power, not the contracts or the strategy or the careful management of fear. This, the eggs, the walking to the kitchen, the not stopping, that was what all of it was supposed to be in service of, and he had just never looked at it directly enough to see it before. He turned off the desk lamp. He went to the kitchen and made dinner for one, which was what it was, and ate it standing at the counter because he had never really learned to eat sitting down when there was no one to sit with, and when he was done he washed the dish and dried it and put it back and looked at the kitchen, at the marble floor, at the pour-over set up on the third shelf, and thought, 2 months. He could wait 2 months. He had been waiting for something his entire life without knowing what it was. 2 months was nothing.